We can't see it, but it's there, and it hits this easily burnable fluffy couch, and this fluffy couch can burst into flames. So again, the arson investigator has got to think about that. He might see a fire origin here and a fire origin point here, and might think it's arson, but he has to realize that it's not necessarily true. There might have just been the infrared radiation that caused other things in the room to burn, and looked like that it was a new fire source. Technically, it is a new fire source, but really all the energy came from here, and it wasn't because a person made a new fire source over here. This is something that firefighters know also, that they've got to understand fire. They've got to know that when they're in a room that's burning, they have to stay away from, let's say, these comfortable chairs, because they have no idea if in a split second the chair right next to them is going to burst into flames. It's because of this problem. This also explains why thermos containers, they don't hold in the heat. They don't hold in the heat forever. I mean, they don't last more than, let's say, a day or two. By that time, like 2 days later or so, the hot tea you put in the thermos has cooled down. The idea behind a thermos container is that you have, let's say, a container over here, and the inner container, which is where you put your hot tea, is over here. There's a vacuum in between the two. So how in the world does the heat get from here to the wall? How does it get there? I mean, there's no matter, no material to carry it. You don't have no conduction that carries it. You have no air current or anything else that carries from here to here. The answer is, because it's hot, it radiates heat in the infrared range over here, and that will get to the outer container, which is open to the air, and this cools down. So that's why your thermos eventually runs out of the heat. I mean, what's in your thermos will eventually cool down. A third way of fire being spread, not just, again, burning one side of the room and eventually it creeps to the other one. We're talking about the less expected ways of heat to be transferred. It happens, and we have to be aware of it, but it might not be expected. Is convection. Let's say wind carries fire. You have a fire over here, on this side of the room. There may be a breeze that blows it to a fire over here, to ignite, let's say, a bunch of papers over here. Wind does blow fire. You also have to, this is especially important because when there's a fire, there's a lot of hot air, let's say, on top of it. That hot air will circulate. It's cold air on the bottom, hot air on the top. You can make some kind of a circulation. That in itself might blow the fire or blow some of the flames into another part of the house. So it might be an air, it might be wind, or it might be the hot gases from the fire itself that caused this. When investigating an arson crime scene or a suspected arson crime scene, a fire, the investigation has to be very quick. Because if it's arson, what usually happens in cases of arson, not always, but if you're a smart arsonist and you want to get the job done well, you will use an accelerant. An accelerant is, it's a very important idea when it comes to arson investigation. An accelerant is something used to speed up to speed up the spread of the fire. Very often it's gasoline. You pour gasoline on the floor, you light it up. It's a lot easier than just putting a match on the floor. Sometimes you use an accelerant because the accelerant produces a lot more heat. So you you ignite the accelerant, that'll be very hot. It'll ignite everything around it because it's just so hot, spread so much heat. Whereas again, a piece of paper might not spread that much heat. So these are accelerants. They make the fire go faster. They make the fire spread faster. So if it's arson, very often, or I would say usually, there's a use of accelerants, something that makes it go faster. Very often it's gasoline, which is very cheap. We might not like it when we have to pay for gallons of it at the gas station, but it's very cheap and very, 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 very available. So that's a very common accelerant. And they also use kerosene and lighter fluid sometimes. The thing is, when they use accelerants, again, they're volatile. I mean, gasoline, it evaporates. The problem is the accelerants used, they evaporate. So we want to get there as soon as possible before it all evaporates. And certainly when you have a lot of the heat of the fire, that will cause even more to evaporate. But believe it or not, we can still get the trace amount that didn't evaporate. However, we want to get there as soon as possible before it all evaporates. Furthermore, these are gasoline, and they're often organic molecules. And because they're organic, they can actually be broken down by microbes in the soil or maybe wherever else they're found. I mean, if they're found on metal, they don't have too many microbes there. But often, accelerants are eaten, are digested by microbes. So we want to get there before that happens. Further, also, people clean up. I mean, after a fire, people wants to salvage whatever he can, so they want to clean it up. Also, safety crews. I mean, if the thing might not be safe, they've got to be jumping around in there and looking for rotten floors, so they can say don't go here or watch out for this, or to say it's safe. When they're jumping around and they're traipsing around, they are going to ruin the crime scene. So we have to get there as soon as possible. It's so important to get there as soon as possible that very often a warrant isn't even needed. Remember, a warrant, a person can enter somebody else's and do and somebody else's domicile and do a search and seizure, even though that is against the Constitution. If evidence is going to be destroyed, then there's a reason he's got to get the evidence, because otherwise it'd be destroyed. So he can do that even without a warrant. So I mean, that's one of the cases where one does not, an officer of the law does not need a warrant in order to do some search and seizure if evidence is about to be destroyed. So after a fire scene, the police investigators can just go right in there without a warrant very often, because it's going to be cleaned up. The accelerants are going to evaporate. They've got to be there immediately, so they might even be able to give you there without a warrant. Now, this is again, the owner does have a right to privacy. It is a constitutional right, so people are very serious about this. And it's also true that if you get evidence that way, it can be contested later on in a court of law, saying, "Well, you violated the search and seizure provision in the Constitution." And if so, the evidence can be discarded. So again, this is contested in court. So you got to be very clear about whether you're really allowed to go in there. But in general, yes, you are. It's known that things will be cleaned up, so evidence will be destroyed. There's enough reason to say that evidence will be destroyed. But remember, be careful about it. Be clear about it, because sometimes it will not be destroyed, and any evidence that's obtained thereby will be discarded in a court of law. So one thing has to be weighed against the other. The owner's right to privacy and right to be safe from unwanted search and seizure against the evidence being destroyed. So the main thing, the first thing, the primary thing that the investigator wants to know is, where did the fire start? What started the fire? And therefore they have to find out where the fire started. Once they find out where it is, they can try to find out how it started and what happened there. I mean, they're not going to look at a place where the fire didn't start, right? Anyway, so one of the things they look for at first is, were there any accelerants used? Is there any evidence of gasoline being poured on the ground? That's a sign of arson, and then it's a crime. It might not have been a crime. Again, these crimes, it's not like, you found a person stabbed, this was a crime. You find a burned up house, you don't know that there was a crime necessarily. It might have been an accident. It might have been an overload of an electrical circuit. Or, as mentioned before, a heater was placed and left on in an unsafe way. We also want to know if there was an ignition device. A match, a lighter. If that was found, that you can find that. I mean, I don't know if you can find a match after the fire is all there, but it's possible. If you can find a lighter, a metal lighter, well, that's a sign it was actually started by someone deliberately. That's a sign of arson. What was the ignition device? Maybe you can find it.